Hi, thanks for coming. Maybe I should say that we, both Boaz, Daniel and I, gave those lectures originally in Jerusalem a few months ago in the Jerusalem Film Festival, and now we're remaking them. We're also publishing them in a small booklet called It's Twilight Again, which you can get here. I think each of us is going to talk for around 20 minutes, so it's not that long. My talk is called From Analog Relics to Digital Relics, and I'm going to start. Is it awkward to frame the 80s as history rather than a fading mythical memory? And what about the 90s and the 2000s and 2010? Today, it seems, defining a point in time where one could refer to his or her recent past as history may be a somewhat tricky gesture to do. While asking those general questions already feels like an old-fashioned or simply an uncool thing to do, they are obviously dependent on the personal relationship between one and his own timeline, both compared simultaneously against the ever-changing and everywhere-changing collective generational notion. In this short talk, while those questions are floating around, I would like to outline a general transition of nostalgic historical framing. This transition is presented through distinct visual characteristics, which function as aesthetic notions of the historical collective memory. I would like to show that the visual trends that are often being used for portraying the recent past are becoming increasingly similar to the ones reflexively portraying the now, thus emphasizing the Latourian untraceable theme between our present time and what we often refer to as history. In his essay, Ideological Effects for the Basic Cinematographic Apparatus from 1970, Jean-Louis Baudry describes the action of filming as a relationship between three layers of cinematic time. Between objective reality and the camera, the site of the inscription, and between the inscription and projection, are situated certain operations, a work which has its result in a finished product. In other words, the first layer is the one of physical actions happening in real life, happening in front of the camera, and is often referred to as the pro-filmic layer. The second one is the recorded version of those actions captured by camera and stored as data or on a film, as a digital file or on a tape. While the third layer is the projected or screen finished version. All of those operations consist of their own duration, everything that is happening from early moments of production to post-production and distribution. They're also heavily affected by two other external time periods that they relate to: their time of origin and the time they are being watched and perceived. In other words, in order to explain it, a good example could be one of a movie that is inherently dealing with temporal issues, such as a futuristic sci-fi movie or an historical epos, while consisting distinct elements of its own time of production. Esther, Amos Gitai's first feature film, released in 1986, reconstructed the Book of Esther while placing it both physically and metaphorically in the ruins of the Arab area of Wadi Salib in Haifa, Israel. An important scene in this movie contains a group of actors all dressed in full biblical costumes, appearing as a loud mob shouting and calling for the death of the story's villain. Slowly, a mass of then contemporary dressed kids are entering the frame, adding their own shouts, calling Yalla Beitar again and again, and Yalla Beitar is a slogan, is a cheering slogan for a well-known Israeli soccer team. While cinema evolved and grew through its short history, films and their mythology, both script-wise and real-life-wise, have constantly developed their self-reflexive capacities. displaying traces of referential gestures and crystal images they cannot avoid following. Through visual pleasure or reflexive gags, mainstream cinema, and I quote Baudry again, does not allow us to see the transformation which has taken place, thus concealing the differences between the film's three layers of time. Therefore, it is a common goal of the avant-garde to break and play with its own aspect of filmic time. In her interview with Amos Gitaï, Irma Klein observes that Gitaï demands from the viewer to think about the clashes he produces. The viewers cannot casually ignore those differences in space and time, and is asked to acknowledge them. As you leave signs of production, she says to Gitaï, they are constantly reminding the viewer of both the film's own history and the general history of representation. Gitaï often creates a rupture between the movie's time layers, its historical content and its historical production time. As one could see in the major dissonance between the faux biblical mob and the group of kids that function as a purified image of the local 80s appearance. Gitaï claims that his decision to leave different traces of time allows the viewer to place his movies at the right and accurate historical time frame. But to what extent can a director or an artist intend a shift from a relationship with a contemporary viewer, meaning that both of them share a similar contemporary moment, to a future one? As Laura Marks writes in her book, The Skin of Film, both film and video, and I quote, become more haptic as they die. Every time we watch a film, we witness its gradual decay, another scratch, more fading as it is exposed to light, or another chemical deterioration. Therefore, when watching a movie on an analog copy, one expects an added layer of physical effect caused by its material format, changing from each copy and screening. Scratches, jumps, and dust spots on a celluloid film copy to glitches and white noise on a VHS one. Different specific color temperature and sharpness are heavily present as well, whether it is the fierce saturation of Technicolor movies or the unstable hazy image appearing on a video cassette that have been re-recorded on again and again. Those visual differences have a major effect on a movie such as Gitaï's Esther, as it is the only available today either as a film copy traveling around the world from one Gitaï retrospective to another, or on a DVD that is transformed from a medium quality beta origin. Even though both versions appear with different visual characteristics, depending on their own different medium and its physical material aesthetics, they both appear today, to the digitally experienced viewer, as an image from a prior time. Intuitively, each format can easily be associated with other elements that share a similar aesthetic family resemblance. The film copy can remind one of other low-budget films made around the 80s or around the late 70s, affected by similar conditions of physical preservation, eventually sharing today a similar color scheme. Or a beta copy that is easily associated with the late 80s, early 90s news productions, often used today as historical documents with strong periodic visual attitude. Hence, the present moment that Gitaï is portraying in his movie is perceived today as a historical moment by itself. Instead of a contemporary reflexive cinematic interpretation of an historical story, it is a nostalgic relic, reflexive only to its visual characteristic dated until its own time of production. The visual attributes that mediate the film from that point in time to the present moment are thus translated into visual codes of specific time periods, adding a fourth layer to Baudry's three layers of cinematic time, the relationship between the movie's historically specific aesthetic and its assimilation by the contemporary viewer. Not good? Yeah, so that Sound icon is a part of the video, it's not here.
פסטיגל משוכלל, כמה קל להדליק, לשחק, להקליק. בוא לפסטיגל.
פסטיגל כמו תמונה משונל, בא לי תיק מבוטיק, זה השיק, כן סרט פסטיגל.
בידיי האנגרי ברד אחריי.
זה כמו מסע בעולם, יש פה מקום לכולם. היי פסטיגל, לא זה לא בחלל.
זה מקפיץ, מסקרן להציג.
בוא לפסטיגל, פסטיגל אינטרנשיונל. זה חלום של מקום, זה .com, כן זה פסטיגל.
It goes on, it's quite long. Yeah. One does not have to follow popular generational essayists from the last decade or two in order to see how the formations of this fourth relational layer in recent decades can be associated with the constantly growing differences between younger generations to their predecessors. These specific changes in recent historical visual attitude can be illustrated through the common background story of the media-generated generation, the ever-growing media sphere embedding itself through a variety of different and new ubiquitous instruments, and the increasing amount of visual inputs deriving from different optical and graphical means, which all function as an overflow of different visual families. Appearance-wise, this constant growth of images was depicted by the transformation of media formats from analog to digital, increasing the awareness towards the format's added layer of physical effect. These realizations and the technological development accompanying them have quickly enabled the reproduction of four historical appearances by using aesthetically related physical mechanisms of the desired for time, meaning to say, creating movies and clips that not only deal with a specific era or a generation, but also look as if they are authentic documents from that time itself. More and more directors and artists have been maneuvering those visual codes using analog visual attitude in order to achieve stronger link to their generational subjects. By using visual tools from the historical collective memory, all of them are emphasizing both irony and nostalgic simplicity, exactly the two edges of the awkward definition between history and recent past. The ability to use analog aesthetic and its visual references can be achieved only by delivering it to the viewer as a reflexive experience of generational alienation. Recognizing the visual attitude equals understanding its historical framing as an outdated phenomena, creating the somewhat distinct separation between analog natives and digital natives. Yet clearly, the technical nature of digital instruments does not assure them a constant sort of contemporaneity. Old-school digital images function today in a similar nostalgic way to analog ones, especially with the takeover of key cultural position by the 80s-90s born generation. The transformation to digital did not only enable a wider range of different new media devices, but the development of new video formats and codecs, thus creating new visual qualities, each one with its own aesthetic references. Instead of physical effects derived from analog material, each of those early codecs, accompanied by non-HD internet and phone cameras, come with its own specific digital and visual attitude. Glitches, ghosting pixels, pale or specific colors, poor lenses effect, frame drops, and so on and so on. While their use is rapidly replaced by the almost non-glitched HD devices and videos, they were able to dictate the low-resolution aesthetic of the last decade. With numerous references to Skype, screen capture, or YouTube aesthetic in both mainstream and avant-garde media, the untraceable seam between outdated and contemporary aesthetic is more present than ever. Framed each year under a different trendy theme, such as time travel, superheroes, kung fu, and etc., last year Festigal, Israel's most well-known annually musical stage production for children, was titled iFestigal, and revolved around the general theme of the virtual world. Its promo clip portrayed by numerous visual cliches, all referring to media elements from recent decades. A Windows desktop, an old Mac environment, a modern Mac sound icon, iPhone icons made out of pillows, an arcade game with flash vector background, YouTube, Google, and shopping websites, Angry Birds, a media player software playing a glitched HD clip, an old-school fighting game, an enlarged pixelated cursor, Facebook's like thumb, and so on and so forth. Even with its inaccuracies, the video's theme and its aesthetic language seem to be synchronized with its context value and subject. A ubiquitous net of nets, merging multiple media into a contemporary collective whole, while all taking place at the most common popular source of local children's pop culture. Yet, to an older viewer, this clip might appear quite awkward. Is it because of the shallow and inaccurate portrait of our visual contemporary moment, badly translated to a younger generation, or is it due to the feeling of being both within and without the depicted subject and its space, being everywhere and nowhere in its created time sphere? Based on its content, one could start and speculate about the future meanings and the possibilities referring to future aesthetic appearances. Perhaps the merging between interface and video could be described as the present aesthetic of our contemporary moment, or taking it even further by referring to the upcoming standard of 4K resolution, pushing the format's physical effect pushing the format's physical effect to its minimum level yet. One could even speculate upon the changes deriving from the upcoming vector codecs, putting an end to the era of pixels, reframing and outdating the distinction between analog and digital. In any case, following McLuhan's claim that the content of every medium is another medium, it might just be enough, at least for now, to wait and see what we can learn from the image of the present moment portrayed in next year's Festival, as it is clear that framing our historically specific aesthetic is as easy as a child's play. Thanks.